There we go. All right, good morning, everybody. Today we are talking about a story in our books called The Shimerdas. Everybody say it at home. The Shimerdas. The Shimerdas. That's actually a title and it's somebody's last name. We learned that in the beginning part of it. I'm going to share my screen with you because I'm going to have my text up and I want you to be able to see a bigger version of the text. But I want you to have your version of page 6 or 7 right in front of you. And you can choose, I think you're going to want to have your highlighter in your hand, but maybe your pencil, because hopefully yesterday you followed the directions to highlight words that you don't know as you read the text. And you might want this pencil today to underline the key events. Because today your homework is going to be to fill out the summary page. So you want to pay attention to those key events so that you are tuned in. All right. Ooh, we're up to 27 people. Good to see. I'm going to share my screen. First of all, we just read last week a story called A Bird's Free Lunch, and it was literary nonfiction, which meant it was a story that was true. So it was a story written by an author that was true about the birds, about him observing birds. But today's genre, I want you to point to the top right corner in your book. You should have your book in your lap. Point to your top right corner. It says realistic fiction. I'm looking for a volunteer to tell me what it means if it's realistic fiction. What does that mean? Raise your hand for me. Let me see it up. What? Who wants to give it a shot? Everyone's a little bit timid. Realistic fiction sounds like big words. All right, let's break it down into 2 words. If it's realistic, what does it mean? Audrey, if it's realistic, what does it mean? You gotta unmute, honey.
It means it's real and it's not fake.
Right.
So I think realistic fiction is just science fiction.
Well, it's not. Science fiction is definitely not real. Science fiction means it has some kind of funky scientific space alien robot element to it. If it's realistic, it's like you and me. It really could have happened. But this didn't really happen nowadays. We know from the beginning that it happened in, it says, the late 1800s. So in this opening part, we learned some important things. We learned that this is the story from a bigger book called My Antonia about a boy named Jim who left Virginia to go live with his grandparents in Nebraska. Here is a map. Look at the screen now. Look at my screen. Here is a map of the United States, and it says 1853 up here is the title. Growth of the United States in 1853. So this is the later part of the 1800s. Here's Virginia. I have my cursor circling Virginia. Do you see where it is? It's not too far from Pennsylvania. This is where Jim is from, but in that beginning excerpt, it shows us that Jim has taken a train all the way across the country. So follow my hand. He probably went through Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, actually that's Missouri, all the way up to Nebraska, where he's now living with his parents. So he used to be near the ocean, and now he is in the middle of farm country in the United States. So I'm sure his life really, really changed when he had to move to live with his grandparents. So, and how did you feel when you found out that Jim's parents had died and he had to move across the country? How were you feeling about this character Jim before you even started the story? Did anybody feel something for him? What did you feel? Raise your hand and I'll have you on mute. Henry, go ahead.
I felt sorry.
Yeah, that would be pretty sad and pretty hard. I think a lot of you have parents that you're not with, or even a parent who has passed away, and it's sad. it would be a really hard time for him. So we have to, before we even read, think about these characters who are, this character and how he's feeling. All right. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read aloud to you while you follow along. Just a second read, and we can ask questions. If there's words we come to that you don't know what they mean, I want you to let me know. And we will talk about that word. All right. So I'm going to start with paragraph 1. I already kind of explained that it means that we know what's happening at the beginning of this story. We talked about the genre, it's realistic fiction, and we know it's about a character named Jim. All right, here we go. Paragraph 1. While grandmother took the pitchfork we found standing in one of the rows and dug potatoes, while I picked them up out of the soft brown earth and put them into the bag, I kept looking up at the hawks that were doing what I might so easily do. So in this very first paragraph, I need to think about what's most important. What is the key event here? And I highlighted it and didn't mean to. I don't know how that happened. I guess it just clicked on a word. I'm going to get my pencil out. I want you to take your pencil out. So far, we know that we have grandmother and I, which is Jim. So I'm going to underline grandmother and I. And what are they doing? They are digging potatoes. So what we really need to know at the beginning here is that grandmother and I are digging potatoes. That's the most important part of the beginning of our story. That's the action. That's what we want to know. We can write right here in the margin. We're going to annotate the text, and I will put a text box. So I'm going to write grandmother. I'm not going to write grandmother and I. I need to be clear in my summary sentences and say grandmother and Jim are digging potatoes. You could even add in the garden. So go ahead at home. I want you to write those words. Let me stretch mine down. Grandmother and Jim are digging potatoes. Go ahead and annotate your text. That's the very beginning of our story. I'm going to put another text box over here just so I'm ready to go on the next side. So you can kind of picture in your head that this boy is working in the garden with his grandmother. He's in this new place that's far away from where he used to live. All right, are we ready to move on? Grandmother and Jim are digging potatoes. I'll be posting a picture of this text, so if you need to add these more later, you can. I'm going to continue on to the next page. I see here at the top there's a picture of Willa Cather. That's the author of this story. She's a really famous author in American history. All right, paragraph 2. When grandmother was ready to go, I said I would like to stay up there in the garden a while. She peered down at me from under her sunbonnet. Aren't you afraid of snakes? A little, I admitted, but I like to stay anyhow. Well, if you see one, don't have anything to do with them. The big yellow and brown ones won't hurt you. They're bull snakes and help to keep the gophers down. Don't be scared if you see anything look out of that hole in the bank over there. That's a badger hole. He's about as big as a possum, and his face is striped, black and white. He takes a chicken once in a while, but I won't let the men harm him. In a new country, in a body feels friendly to the animals. I like to have him come out and watch me when I'm at work. All right. I noticed this. Did you notice this? This little footnote where she says in a new country, the grandma says that. That's a footnote. And down here at the bottom, there's a footnote that says a new country. The reference is, just a second, Henry. The reference is to Nebraska being still a part of a wilderness and only recently settled. So that's what she's talking about there. All right, Henry, what are you thinking?
There's also a footnote in paragraph 1.
Oh, you're right. Paragraph 1, back at the opening, it told us that this book, My Antonia, is part of a trilogy. Do any of you like books like The Lord of the Rings or The Hunger Games? Books that have 3 in a set? Or I'm trying to think of some other famous trilogies. Yeah? So a trilogy is a set of 3 books. So you might be into a series that there's only 3 of them, and it's called a trilogy. Like the beginning part of Star Wars, when it first came out, it was the Star Wars trilogy. So you might think of that too. Thanks, Henry, for drawing attention to that. All right, on this page, what are the key events? Think back. What do we need to know that's happened so far? We've got a lot of description of the grandma's advice, but what's happening? What's Jim want to do, and what's grandma say? Who can sum that up for me in a sentence? What does Jim want to do, and what does grandma say? Who wants to go for it? Camden, I bet you can do it. Camden, what's Jim want to do? Can you unmute?
He would like to stay in the garden.
Yeah, he wants to stay in the garden. So what's grandma tell him, Camden?
He wants to stay in the garden.
Yeah, but what advice does grandma say? Camden, it's still you. Are you there? Anybody else got it? David's got it. Zach's got it. Zach, go ahead. What does our Jim Burden want to do? He wants to stay, and what's grandma say?
Are you afraid of snakes?
And what advice does she give? What does she tell him? To stay away from what?
If you see one, don't have anything to do.
Yep, she gives him advice. So that right there is our I got this extra. What did I do here, guys? I got some crazy drawing. I'm going to leave it right there. So our key event here is that he wants to stay in the garden, and she gives him some advice. So we're going to just write that quick key event here and say over in our margin, Jim wants to stay. Jim asks to stay longer, and grandma warns him about the snakes. I don't know. I might not want to stay once I heard about the snakes. I don't know about you guys. I can't get my box to go bigger, but you guys can write it at home. Here, there we go. Jim asks to stay longer, and grandma warns him about the snakes. So far there's our key event. So you should be writing this in your margin, and make sure you underline these sentences if you didn't do it already. Aubrey, are you writing in your book? Aubrey seems frozen, so I guess when you're frozen, you can't write in your book. I can see Michaela's doing it. Using the text, Paige is doing it. Thank you, guys. Lily, do you have it written? Did you underline your text? Great. All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more time before I switch the page. All right, I'm ready to switch. You ready to switch? Thumbs up. All right, we're going to finish up the story, and then we're going to talk about fluency. All right, page 8. Grandmother swung the bag of potatoes. Oh, you know what I wanted to ask you? Are there words you didn't know on these pages? Are there words you highlighted? Unmute and ask me about them. If you highlighted words, which ones did you wonder about? Anyone? Go ahead and unmute and say them, and we'll talk about them.
Sunbonnet.
Sunbonnet. Oh, Zachary, I wish I had my sunbonnet to wear. A sunbonnet is just like a. Oh, I'm gonna make my sweater like a sunbonnet. Oh no, I can't. It's not big enough. It would just be over your head and tie like the pioneers under your neck, and it would keep the sun. It would usually have a longer bill over it to keep the sun out of the farmers' faces. And usually women wore the sunbonnets and men wore different hats. All right. Next term, go ahead, unmute and ask. Possum? That's the animal opossum. It's just abbreviated funny. So it's a big possum. Do you know what the animal opossum looks like? You see them dead in the road all the time with those long, gross tails. All right, Michaela, go ahead. I couldn't hear you, real loud. Still couldn't hear you. Can you type it in the chat? You type it in the chat, honey, and Audrey, would you tell me what your word is that you're wondering?
Yes, trilogy.
What paragraph is it in?
It's not any paragraph.
Oh, trilogy. We already talked about that word. It's in the footnote. It means when a book is part of a set of 3 books. Trilogy. Say it, Audrey. Trilogy.
Trilogy.
Trilogy. Okay. All right. Kayla, did you find the chat? Did anybody hear the word Kayla say and maybe have louder? Or Kayla, you could write it on your whiteboard. Does anybody else have a word? Here are some words I highlighted. Pitchfork. A pitchfork is like a big fork you use for farming. That might be a word you didn't know. Oh, Kayla, peered. Oh, okay, that's a good word. I can't find what paragraph it is right now, but when you peer into something, you look in like you peer in a window. It's kind of another word for peeking. You peek into something, you peer into it. All right, can we go on to page 8? I flipped through, I didn't see any other questions or anything in the chat. All right, page 8, starting with paragraph 6. Grandmother swung the bag of potatoes over her shoulder and went down the path, leaning forward a little. The road followed the windings of the draw. Oop, I see that word right there with the footnote, and down at the bottom it says a draw is a shallow gully. I want everybody to point to the footnote that says draw, a shallow gully. So that's like just a little ditch where he went. All right, the road followed the windings of the draw. When she came to the first bend, she waved at me and disappeared. I was left alone with this new feeling of lightness and content. Oh, I love the way Jim is feeling, that he's alone by the garden and he's feeling light and content. So Grandma left, Jim is on his own. I sat down in the middle of the garden where snakes could scarcely approach unseen. Scarcely means hardly. You would see the snakes if they came, and leaned my back against a warm yellow pumpkin. There were some ground cherry bushes growing along the furrows. That's like a little hill full of fruit. I turned back to the papery triangular sheaths that protected the berries and ate a few. Did any of you highlight the word sheaths? Sheaths is like a little covering. Like if you have a knife, you might put a knife in a sheath, like a hunting knife, but it's a little protective covering. Let's finish up. Page 9, all about me giant grasshoppers, twice as big as any I had seen, were doing acrobatic feats among the dried vines. Can you just picture those grasshoppers being little acrobats? The gophers scurried up and down the plowed ground. There in the shelter, Aiden, be still. Thank you. All along there in the sheltered draw bottom, the wind did not blow very hard, but I could hear it singing its humming tune up on the level, and I could see the tall grasses wave. The earth was warm under me, and warm as I crumbled it through my fingers. Odd little red bugs came out and moved in slow squadrons about me. Their backs were polished vermilion. Oop, there's another footnote, vermilion. And down below it says vermilion is a bright red-orange color. What bugs are we talking about? Madison, what bugs is this part of the story is talking about? Do you know? Little red bugs, bright orange with black spots. Can you tell? Can you unmute and guess? Solomon knows it. I'm going to give him a chance. Go ahead, Solomon. Yes, those are ladybugs. He's watching ladybugs. Okay, now the middle of paragraph 10. I kept as still as I could. Nothing happened. I did not expect anything to happen. I was something that laid under the sun and felt it, like pumpkins, and I did not want to be anything more. I was entirely happy. Perhaps we feel like that when we die, and we become some part of something entire, whether it is sun and air or goodness and knowledge. At any rate, that is happiness, to be dissolved into something complete and great when it comes to one as naturally as sleep. All right. So, my friends, we finished the story. We're gonna underline this page, but we're not gonna write summary sentences because I want to finish up. Let me slide this down, get my pen out. So the most important things on this page, there's a lot of text, isn't there? But really the most important things are that grandmother went on her way and Jim sat in the, grandma went away. Grandmother went down the path. So I'm going to underline grandmother went down the path and Jim was left alone. And really all of this on this big page, of Jim sitting in the garden, noticing the bugs, noticing the plants. What's he really doing? He's just noticing the world around him. So our story just ends with Jim noticing the bugs and the plants and everything. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and talk to you about something, the homework. On this page that you need to do after our lesson, it has fill in the blank sentences. Now, some of them will be really easy, and some of them you're going to put in some of your own words. Like, look at the last one. The last one for paragraphs 8 through 11, you're going to put into your own words what Jim did at the end of the story. He just enjoyed and noticed things, noticed the bugs, noticed the cherries, sat against a pumpkin. So that's what he did in the end of the story. I want you to pay attention that these are sentences. So if you start a sentence, it needs a capital. I'm noticing that you're getting better at writing your capital M's and P's and G's correctly, so I appreciate that. All right. I was going to talk to you about fluency, but this is really quick. So everybody stand up and take a big stretch. I'm going to stop the video.